The autumn sunlight filled Washington, D.C. with a golden glow as Pete Hegseth, the newly appointed Secretary of Defense of the United States, adjusted his navy blue tie in front of the Pentagon mirror. At 44, the former military officer and political commentator had reached the peak of his career, and his expression reflected the confidence of someone used to victory. "Mr. Secretary, we're ready for the press conference," said his advisor, a middle-aged woman with thin-framed glasses and a clipboard in hand. "Remember, there will be questions about the situation in Burkina Faso." Hegseth nodded, showing no sign of worry. "I'm prepared. It's time to show the world how we handle regimes that challenge the international order." The Pentagon press room was crowded. Journalists from across the globe filled the space with their gear, cameras placed carefully to capture every expression of the new secretary. The flashing lights created a dramatic setting as Hegseth walked confidently to the podium. After briefly addressing domestic issues and ongoing military operations, the expected question was asked. "Secretary Hegseth, how do you respond to Captain Ibrahim Traoré's recent announcement that Burkina Faso is withdrawing from military cooperation with the United States?" Hegseth's face briefly tightened before he gave a confident smile. The cameras caught the shine in his eyes, the kind seen before statements that go down in history, not always for the right reasons. "Look, let's be honest," he said, leaning slightly forward. "Traoré is just another loser trying to stay relevant on the world stage. These military coup leaders always follow the same pattern. They blame the West for their own failures, make shady alliances, and in the end make things worse for their people." A quiet stir spread across the room. Some reporters exchanged surprised looks at the severity of his words, but Hegseth seemed pleased by the effect. "The United States remains committed to stability in West Africa, but we won't waste time on leaders who choose the wrong side of history. Traoré can make his choices, but he should be ready for the consequences." The speech was broadcast live around the world. Within minutes, headlines and trending topics read, "Hegseth calls Traoré a loser." Inside the Pentagon's Situation Room, a senior advisor for African affairs watched with concern. "This will have consequences," he muttered to a colleague. "Traoré isn't the type to ignore an insult like that." Meanwhile, more than 5,000 miles away in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, the burning Sahel sun scorched the dusty streets in the presidential palace. A young assistant ran down the halls holding a tablet, eager to show Captain Ibrahim Traoré what had just happened in Washington.com. Palace, the official residence of Burkina Faso's president, didn't have the usual luxury of African presidential homes. Since coming to power via a military coup 2 years earlier, the 36-year-old Captain Ibrahim Traoré had adopted a policy of austerity, starting with his own home. That afternoon, with temperatures around 104 degrees, Traoré was meeting rural community representatives impacted by terrorist attacks in the north. Dressed in a plain military uniform, without show, he listened carefully to the elders' updates on security. "Excellency, sorry to interrupt," said his assistant Musa, entering quickly. "I think you need to see this right away." Traoré raised his hand to pause the meeting and stepped aside. Musa handed him the tablet, showing Hegseth's statement. The young leader watched without expression, except for a slight narrowing of his eyes. "Thank you, Musa," he said, giving the tablet back. "Call the Foreign Minister and the National Security Council for a meeting in 1 hour, and prepare the communications room." Returning to the community leaders, Traoré apologized. "Gentlemen, we have an urgent national matter. We'll continue this important discussion tomorrow, and I promise each of your concerns will be heard. After the visitors left, Traoré remained alone for a moment. He looked out the window at the city struggling to survive under terrorism, climate crisis, and long foreign influence, which he believed had only left the country poorer. Raised in a modest rural family, Traoré had climbed the military ladder through his own efforts. His popularity among average Birkenhead citizens came from his simple background and apparent honesty, rare qualities in the region's politics. An hour later, his top advisors gathered in the palace meeting room. The foreign minister, a seasoned, 60-year-old diplomat, seemed especially worried. "Captain, I suggest a diplomatic response, maybe a formal statement showing disappointment in the American secretary's words, but nothing that escalates." Traoré listened calmly to everyone before speaking. His voice was steady but firm. "Secretary Hegseth chose to call me a loser in front of the world. Not for what I do, but to insult not just me, but all the people of Burkina Faso." He paused, making eye contact with each advisor. "This isn't about personal ego. It's about national pride, and it needs a response that matches the offense." "Do you plan to make an official announcement?" asked the Minister of Communication. "No," replied Traoré, standing up. "I'm going to do something different, something that Secretary Hegseth and the world do not expect." As the meeting ended, the sun began setting over Ouagadougou, painting the sky in red and orange in the streets. News of Hegseth's comments had already begun spreading, sparking outrage among the people. Groups of young citizens gathered in cafes and public squares, passionately discussing the insult to their leader at the palace. Traoré withdrew to his personal office, a modest room decorated only with the national flag and photographs of African independence heroes. He sat at his desk and began writing by hand, refusing help from any advisors or speechwriters. His response would be personal, direct, and, as the world would soon see, devastatingly effective. The next morning in Washington, the sky was cloudy with a light drizzle, as if foreshadowing what was to come. At the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth arrived, early, pleased with the reaction to his statements from the day before. Leading American newspapers highlighted his strong remarks, and conservative media praised his firm position against authoritarian regimes. "Mr. Secretary," his chief of staff, Jennifer Matz, called out, interrupting his morning reading, "we have a situation. Captain Traoré has just released a video response, and it's going viral worldwide." Hegseth looked up from the newspapers, surprised. "A video? Not an official statement?" "No, sir. It's a personal video, apparently filmed in his office. It's already gained over 5 million views in under 2 hours, and all major media outlets are sharing it." The Secretary of Defense frowned as he took the tablet from his assistant. On the screen, Ibrahim Traoré's calm face appeared, speaking directly to the camera. Contrary to what Hegseth expected, the Burkina leader wasn't wearing a military uniform but a simple, traditional African shirt. "Good morning, citizens of the world," Traoré began, speaking fluent and clear English. "My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and according to the United States Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, I am a loser." Traoré's calm tone contrasted with the gravity of his words. "Before replying to this label, I would like to share some facts. Burkina Faso is a country that has been fighting terrorism for over 10 years. A country where children die of hunger, while tons of gold, manganese, and uranium are taken from our land to enrich foreign companies. A country that, despite decades of Western aid, remains one of the poorest in the world." Traoré paused, his eyes focused on the camera. Now, let's talk about winners and losers. Mr. Hegseth, the United States spent more than $2 trillion in Afghanistan over 20 years, only to leave the country in chaos, back in the hands of the same group it promised to defeat. Is that what you call a victory? As the video continued, Hegseth's face grew more tense. Traoré carefully mentioned failed American military missions, overpriced defense deals, and alliances with dictatorships when it suited US interests. In Burkina Faso, we are choosing a different path. We reject aid that comes with conditions that compromise our independence. We nationalize our natural resources so they benefit our people, not foreign shareholders. We seek partnerships built on mutual respect, not submission. The closing part of the video struck the hardest. Mr. Hegseth, if fighting for the dignity and independence of my people makes me a loser in your eyes, then I accept that title with pride. But maybe the real question is, what does it really mean to win? Is it about piling up weapons and military bases all over the world? Or is it making sure your people have food, education, healthcare, and dignity? Traoré ended with an unexpected invitation. I invite Secretary Hegseth to visit Burkina Faso, not for meetings in air-conditioned rooms, but to meet our people, to see our challenges, and perhaps learn that there are different meanings of victory in this world. The door is open. When the video ended, silence filled Hegseth's office. Jennifer Matz watched her boss, waiting for his reaction. Who approved releasing this video through our media? Hegseth asked, his voice tense. No one, sir. The video was posted directly by Traoré on his official social media. Our networks are only reporting its existence, just like with any statement from a head of state. Hegseth threw the tablet onto his desk. Call the State Department and the communications team. We need a coordinated response immediately. But it was already too late. In the next few hours, Traoré's video kept gaining views rapidly. Political analysts from all sides began debating his message. Hashtags like hashtag #TRAORE response and hashtag #WhatIsWinning started trending globally. The most troubling part for the American government was that support wasn't coming only from US critics. European allies, respected experts, and even American military veterans were publicly recognizing the clarity and truth in Traoré's message. One former US ambassador to West Africa appeared on TV and said, "Captain Traoré has just delivered a masterclass in diplomacy and strategy. He turned a personal insult into a worldwide conversation about global policy, development, and the true definition of national success." By the end of the day, the White House issued a careful statement trying to calm the situation without fully rejecting Hegseth's words. The United States values its relationships with all African nations and acknowledges the specific challenges they face. Individual comments do not always represent the full position of our administration. For Hegseth, however, the damage was already done. What was intended to be a show of strength had become a diplomatic humiliation on a global scale. As night fell over Washington, he knew the next day would bring more consequences in the following 48 hours. The conflict between Hegseth and Traoré went beyond simple bilateral issues. It turned into a worldwide cultural moment in New York. University students hosted debates about neocolonialism and national sovereignty. In Paris, intellectuals discussed the situation passionately in the Latin Quarters, cafes in Lagos, Nairobi, and Johannesburg. Young Africans proudly shared Traoré's video, praising his stance on a US Congress. The mood was divided. Some lawmakers defended Hegseth, saying it was necessary to show strength. Others criticized him for what they described as childish diplomacy that hurt US interests in Africa. Senator Catherine Blaine, chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, called an emergency hearing. Secretary Hegseth, she began, in front of a room full of journalists and cameras. Do you believe calling a head of state a loser in an official press conference serves the diplomatic and national security interests of the United States? Hegseth, wearing a flawless suit and maintaining a composed look, answered, Senator, my statement reflected real concerns about the path Burkina Faso is taking under its current leadership. Maybe my wording wasn't the most diplomatic, but the core message remains valid. The core message? The senator asked. Captain Traoré raised clear issues about failed American military interventions and conflicting policies. Can you factually disprove any of his claims? Hegseth paused briefly. The silence, captured by the cameras, would become another viral moment from this extraordinary episode. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was experiencing an unmatched rise in popularity. His calm and articulate response had struck a chord, not only with his own people, but with many in developing countries worldwide. In the streets of Burkina Faso's capital, artists painted murals showing Traoré as a defender of African pride. Musicians composed songs using lines from his speech. Even neighboring countries that had once been cautious about the young military leader were now showing admiration. At an African Union meeting in Addis Ababa, Burkina Faso's delegate received a standing ovation. Kenya's president, in a symbolic moment, declared, Captain Traoré spoke not just for Burkina Faso, but for all of us who want partnerships built on mutual respect, not domination. Then, on the fourth day after the original event, something unexpected happened. A group of American military veterans who had served in African missions released an open letter. As former service members who operated in Africa, we understand how complex the issues are in places like Burkina Faso. The letter read, many of us saw with our own eyes how unclear strategies and poor cultural awareness hurt our missions and the people we were there to help. Captain Traoré's call for respectful dialogue should be taken seriously, not dismissed. The letter was signed by over 200 veterans, including several high-ranking officers. It was a particularly harsh blow for Hegseth, who often referred to his military service as a source of credibility. At the Pentagon, worried advisors were watching yet another troubling development. Intelligence reports showed that Russia and China were quickly using the situation to strengthen ties with Burkina Faso and other Sahel countries. Mr. Secretary, said the Director of African Intelligence, we've confirmed that a senior Chinese delegation is coming to Ouagadougou next week to discuss new infrastructure projects. At the same time, Russian military advisors are already there, providing training and equipment, without the usual conditions attached to our aid. Hegseth, who had been working for days to contain the situation, now understood this was more than just a personal failure. It was becoming a full-blown geopolitical crisis. What had started as an offhand remark now threatened to speed up the decline of American influence in a strategically crucial region. That night, during an emergency Oval Office meeting, the President of the United States expressed his displeasure. Pete, you've turned a country that barely showed up in our daily briefings into a global symbol of resistance to American power. Now we're dealing not just with Burkina Faso, but a wave spreading through the region. For the first time since the crisis began, Hegseth looked genuinely shaken. Double quotes, Mr. President. I take full responsibility, he said. I'm preparing a full strategy to repair the damage. Maybe, the Secretary of State interrupted, we should seriously consider Traoré's invitation. Not you personally, Pete, but a high-level delegation. Showing we're willing to listen could turn this crisis into an opportunity. The President nodded slowly. Prepare the options. And, Pete, no public statements on this for now. 2 weeks after the crisis began, a US government plane landed at Ouagadougou International Airport. As many had guessed, Pete Hegseth was not on board. Instead, the delegation was led by the Under-Secretary of State for African Affairs, Dr. Amara Johnson, a well-respected scholar and diplomat with Ghanaian roots. Her appointment was strategic. Beyond her qualifications, she symbolized a different approach: dialogue instead of confrontation, understanding instead of imposition. Choosing her to lead the mission was widely praised in both Washington and across the African continent. At the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré welcomed the American delegation with respectful formality, but without the grandeur usually seen during such visits. The meeting, initially scheduled for 1 hour, lasted more than 4. Captain Traoré Johnson began after the initial introductions. I come not just as a representative of the American government, but as someone truly interested in understanding your vision for Burkina Faso and how we can build a relationship based on mutual respect. Traoré looked at the diplomat for a moment before replying, Dr. Johnson, I appreciate your approach. Let me be clear. Burkina Faso is not against partnerships with the United States or any other country. We are against partnerships that treat us as inferiors instead of equals. Over the following hours, a sincere conversation unfolded. Traoré described the security issues his country was facing, including the fight against extremist groups that had displaced more than 1 million. Burkinab, he also spoke about how decades of externally imposed economic policies had failed to bring long-term development. Johnson listened closely and shared how US foreign policy was undergoing a reassessment, admitting past errors and exploring new ways forward. What many in Washington don't understand, she explained, is that security cannot be established only by military means. Economic development, inclusive governance, and respect for national sovereignty are just as essential. Traoré nodded. Exactly what I've been trying to say. When we nationalized our gold mines, it wasn't ideological. It was because our people were starving while our resources enriched others. At the end of the meeting, something unexpected occurred. Johnson handed Traoré an envelope. A personal letter from Secretary Hegseth, she said. Traoré opened it with a neutral expression. The handwritten letter was short. Captain Traoré, my words were reckless and disrespectful, not only to you, but to the people of Burkina Faso. I accept your invitation to learn more about the difficulties your country faces, not as a winner speaking to a loser, but as two leaders committed to the good of their people. Respectfully, Pete Hegseth. Traoré carefully folded the letter and placed it in his shirt pocket. Please let Secretary Hegseth know that I have received his letter and that the invitation remains open. That night, after the American delegation had left, Traoré walked alone through the palace gardens. One of his closest advisers found him gazing at the stars. It was a good day for Burkina Faso, Excellency. The advisor said. Traoré gave a slight smile. It was a good day for dialogue. The real work begins now. In the following days, results from the visit started to appear. Washington announced a policy review for the Sahel, emphasizing economic development and security cooperation without attaching political conditions. At the same time, Traoré signaled a willingness to renegotiate some agreements while keeping national sovereignty non-negotiable in Washington. Pete Hegseth faced his own moment of introspection. The episode had hurt his reputation, but also gave him a chance to grow. In a carefully managed interview, he admitted, "I spent years criticizing what I saw as weak diplomacy, but I've learned that real strength comes from wisdom, not arrogance. My interaction with Captain Traoré, even from afar, taught me something valuable about global leadership." 6 months after the original incident, something unexpected happened. Pete Hegseth landed in Ouagadougou for an official visit. Some protested his presence, but many watched with curiosity. At the airport, Ibrahim Traoré was waiting. When the two men met face to face for the first time, they shook hands firmly in front of the world's cameras. "Welcome to Burkina Faso, Secretary Hegseth," said Traoré. "Thank you for receiving me, Captain Traoré," Hegseth replied. "I'm here to learn." As they walked side by side into the terminal, journalists picked up a short conversation. "You know," Captain Hegseth said in a low voice, "in our first exchange, you asked what it truly means to win." Traoré looked at him with interest. "And have you reached an answer?" Hegseth smiled slightly. "Maybe winning means having the courage to change your mind when shown a better path." Traoré nodded. "Or maybe it's realizing that in a fair world, we don't need to label people as winners or losers." Cameras captured the two men smiling as they entered the official car. No one could say for sure whether this new connection would lead to lasting changes in relations between the two nations. But one thing was certain: a reckless insult had paradoxically opened the door to a more genuine dialogue than decades of formal diplomacy ever had. In capitals around the world, leaders and diplomats watched closely. Maybe there was a lesson for all. True power isn't about dominating others, but about having the courage to respect them and the humility to learn from different views. And as the official car moved through the streets of Ouagadougou, ordinary people wondered whether they were watching just another political performance or the start of a new chapter in global relations. One based not on hierarchy, but on mutual respect. Time would tell. But for now, in a world often divided by harsh words, the image of two former adversaries speaking as equals offered a rare glimpse of hope.